Nobody woke up in year zero, hungover after New Year's Eve, and said, "Wow, that was a hell of a send-off. Okay then, all hail the new era." Well, nobody except some shepherds near Bethlehem, so the stories say. You're listening to Open Book, a podcast about interpreting literature with Michael Elliott. Welcome to Open Book Episode 4, How to Read Dante's Inferno, Canto 5. I'm Michael Elliott, Associate Professor of English at the University of Calgary, and today's topic is Dante's Inferno. Well, rather, it's one of 33 cantos that make up Dante's Inferno, which is itself the first of three parts of Dante's Commedia, and later called the Divina Commedia, or Divine Comedy, an early 14th century epic poem of 14,000 lines recounting the narrator Dante's own week-long journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise. Unlike my other series on longer poems or books like Paradise Lost or Don Quixote, this is the only episode I plan to do on this poem, and that's because, one, I'm an English scholar, not an Italianist, and two, this canto relates a notorious episode in medieval literature and in the history of reading, the illicit love of Paulo and Francesca, provoked after they read a book together. Paulo and Francesca symbolize the dangerously suggestive power of reading and have become a warning against taking your reading too seriously. A warning cited by censors and moralizers through the centuries. The three parts of today's episode surround each other like the concentric rings of hell. Maybe that's not the best metaphor. Anyway, first I'll briefly describe the story of Dante's Inferno, and then I'll guide you toward the second circle of hell, where our narrator meets those spirits punished for lust. And finally I'll introduce you to Paulo and Francesca, the adulterous lovers who were seduced by a book to seduce each other. My source of all quotations from Dante in this episode are from the translation of Robert and Jean Hollander, published by Doubleday in 2000. Let's start with an overview of Dante's Inferno. The story begins with the poet suffering a spiritual crisis at midlife, wandering in a dark wood. The spirit of Virgil appears to him and offers to guide him on a journey. And this is Canto 1, lines 112 following. "For your sake," says Virgil, "I think it wise you follow me. I will be your guide, leading you from here through an eternal place where you shall hear despairing cries and see those ancient souls in pain as they bewail their second death." Virgil is no ordinary guide. He was a classical Latin poet and author of the epic Aeneid, the most revered narrative poem in Dante's medieval Italy. It told the story of Aeneas, a hero from the city of Troy in western Turkey, destroyed by Greek invaders in a long war described by the Greek poet Homer in his epic Iliad. Aeneas found his way to Italy, where, according to this myth, the city of Rome became the successor to Troy. All this, the poet Virgil wrote some 1400 years before Dante's Inferno, and now the spirit of Virgil has been sent to guide Dante by Beatrice, another spirit of a woman whom Dante has loved and lost. Beatrice will guide him up to heaven in the Paradiso, which is part 3 of the Divine Comedy, but she needs Virgil to guide Dante through hell and purgatory in the first two parts, because as a pagan author, he is consigned to those realms. It's a curious feature of Dante's cosmology, or his Christian knowledge of the moral and physical universe, that pagans are inadmissible to heaven because they were born at the wrong time. In the first, most peaceful circle of hell, Dante will meet the spirits of Homer, Ovid, and other classical poets. Anyway, hell and purgatory are open to Virgil because he died in 30 BCE, so away they go. Time for a brief digression. You may have noticed that I use the term BCE, which means before the Common Era, rather than the more old-fashioned term BC, or before Christ. And that's because Christianity, which began as one among multiple minor Judaic cults in the Eastern Mediterranean, has since gathered quite a following, including among historians. But it wasn't that way in the beginning. Nobody woke up in year zero, hungover after New Year's Eve, and said, "Wow, that was a hell of a send-off. Okay then, all hail the new era." Well, nobody except some shepherds near Bethlehem, so the stories say. Instead, much later, historians took the convention of dating histories by the year that a king's or an emperor's reign began, and they applied it to Christ's birthday. There were multiple competing calendars at the time. Indeed, there still are. The present year, 2020, is 5780 in the Hebrew calendar that started with the world's creation in the Old Testament, and it's 1442 in the Hijri calendar that started with the first Muslim community in Medina. Anyway, the Christian historians prevailed, and so now, for ecumenical reasons, we say BCE and CE instead of BC and AD, which is the Latin Anno Domini for the year of our Lord. End of digression. In Dante's telling, the gate to hell is somewhere in northern Italy. Inscribed over it is the memorable warning, "Abandon all hope, you who enter here. Once you enter, you don't exit, unless you're just visiting, as Dante is." So why is he visiting, you ask? Well, like I said, this is just the first of 3 realms that Dante will visit on his tour of the Christian cosmos, but it owes something to the pagan classical convention of a journey to the underworld that heroes undertake in epic poems, including in Homer's Odyssey and in Virgil's own Aeneid. They descend in order to learn things, and to visit with old friends and fallen heroes. There isn't the stigma in the pagan underworld that attaches to the Christian hell as a place of punishment, only because it didn't contrast with some better place that souls could go. There was just no other place to go. There was a hierarchy of otherworldly locales like Elysium or Tartarus, but they weren't as stratified as the Christian heaven and hell. And so Dante, in the spirit of Virgil, descend through the 9 circles of hell, meeting various figures from ancient and recent history who are eternally punished for their sins. The circles are arranged in order of increasing sinfulness, from gluttony to greed to violence. And in the circle of lust, Dante and Virgil encounter 9 famous lovers. Quote, "They who make reason subject to desire," in Canto 5, lines 39. That is, they invert the traditional hierarchy of reason over passion. Among them are Helen of Troy, for whom the city was destroyed, Achilles, the hero of the Greek army that did it, Dido and Cleopatra, both African queens provoked to suicide by betrayal, and Tristan, knight of medieval romances and Richard Wagner's 19th century opera. But the only lover's spirit who speaks to Dante is Francesca da Polenta of Ravenna, which is also in northern Italy. A real person who in the early 1280s had a love affair with her brother-in-law, Paolo Malatesta of the nearby city of Rimini. So far, so mundane. But what makes Paulo and Francesca's affair so memorable is the way that it started. It seems that they were reading a racy book together, namely the Arthurian legend of the knight Lancelot's illicit love of King Arthur's wife Guinevere. Francesca describes their love as a force outside themselves, embodied by Cupid, the god of love himself, in lines 100 following. Quote, "Love, quick to kindle in the gentle heart, seized this man with a fair form taken from me. The way of it afflicts me still. Love, which absolves no one beloved from loving, seized me so strongly with his charm that, as you see, it has not left me yet. Love brought us to one death." She's arguing, in other words, that their love wasn't their own fault, that it was due to the gods' charms and decisions. When Dante asks how it happened, Francesca recounts the story. "One day, to pass the time in pleasure, we read of Lancelot, how love enthralled him. We were alone, without the least misgiving. More than once that reading made our eyes meet and drained the color from our faces. Still, it was a single instant overcame us, when we read how the longed-for smile was kissed by so renowned a lover. This man, who never shall be parted from me, all trembling kissed me on my mouth. A Galeotto was the book, and he that wrote it. That day we read in it no further." Canto 5, lines 127 following. Galeotto here is Galaho, the go-between for Lancelot and Guinevere. In other words, the panderer, the enabler. He's to blame, like the god of love. So says Francesca, who's eager to blame others for her own lust. A Galeotto was the book, and he that wrote it, Francesca says, though, to be fair, she only came to hell a few decades ago, so time and more punishment may alter her mind. Francesca's closing line, "That day we read in it no further," is powerfully suggestive. It's the equivalent of a film fading to black when the two lovers consummate their passion. We, the audience, can only see so much. The rest is for us to imagine, and for them to keep private. But her phrasing, well, or rather the poet Dante's phrasing, deliberately echoes a line in another famous book of medieval Christianity. Quote, "I did not wish to read any further." That's from St. Augustine's Confessions, a spiritual autobiography that's full of salacious details about his youthful sins of the flesh. One day in the 4th century, CE, I should say, this reprobate took up St. Paul's letter to the Romans in the New Testament and read the admonition, quote, "to make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof." This and other teachings were enough to convert young Augustine to Christian living, and so he read no further. For Francesca to use the same line now, comparing the immoral power of a medieval romance to the moral effect, St. Paul's conversion of another venerated father of the church, this comparison was shocking and near blasphemous, but it testifies to the power of reading, to suggest good or ill depending on the reader's inclination toward lust or away from it. What happened next? Paulo and Francesca's beautiful, brief love affair came to a bad end. When her jealous husband discovered Francesca's affair, he murdered her and Paulo. But Francesca would be consoled to know that Dante will meet his soul later on, among those who betray family members in a lower circle of hell, suffering a worse fate than theirs. You've been listening to Open Book, a podcast about interpreting literature with Michael Elliott. The next episode continues my series on John Milton's Paradise Lost, books 2 and 3. taking us from hell to heaven to earth, not in Dante's cosmos, but in Milton's. Meanwhile, you can search me up in the usual places. It should turn up my blog if you spell my surname Ullyot, or go straight there by typing j.mp/ULLYOT. You can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter in descending order of regularity. And then there's old-fashioned email, ullyot@ucalgary.ca. That's UCALGARY.ca. The music from this episode is courtesy of the Open Well Tempered Clavier project and performed by Kimiko Ishizaka. For more on Dante's Inferno, see my sources for this podcast, the introduction and notes of Robert Hollander in his 2000 translation, already mentioned, and the October 2008 episode on Dante's Inferno of the BBC Radio 4 program In Our Time.